So yeah, here's the footage of this just happened a day ago. Drone strike that happened on the Kuwaiti International Airport. Um, 63 people were injured in the strikes. That's more than I thought. I only heard a couple dozen. Yeah, and I heard one person died as well. Yeah, I don't really understand what the goal of Iran in this kind of a strike is, right? Maybe they're just trying to hit U.S. allyship because they're mad at the U.S., but they aren't able to hit U.S. assets or any U.S. air bases in the region because they're far too protected with robust anti-missile, anti-drone defense systems, right? I don't know. Maybe this is just a target of opportunity. They know they're a bit weaker, a bit more susceptible to this sort of thing. Iranian drones heavily damaged a passenger terminal at Kuwait's main airport Wednesday, killing one person, wounding dozens, and briefly closing the airfield. The latest in back and forth attacks by Iran and the U.S. that test a fragile ceasefire. Fragile ceasefire is literally non-existent at this point. Why do they call it? Why do so many of these articles try to pretend like there's still a ceasefire happening? Right? There's not. The strike reinforced the risks to residents and travelers in Gulf countries that had considered themselves relative havens before the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran. Iran denied causing the damage. Talks have dragged on for weeks as mediators seek a more enduring truce in the war. Now in its fourth month, they are increasingly strained by Israel's broadening war with Iran-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. Regional officials said Iran wanted a separate ceasefire in Lebanon, enforced before returning to talks. Yet I covered this just like a couple days ago, but like this is a complete non-starter, right? Unless Hezbollah somehow agrees to some ceasefire, which they're absolutely not, right? They're going to continue to strike Israel, right? Hezbollah is a serious threat to Israel, right? They shoot tons and tons of rockets, tons and tons of drones into Israel. It is literally part of their bylaws and their stated goal to see the destruction of Israel and the killing of all the Jews there, that they're not going to stop doing. They're not going to stop attacking Hezbollah, right? And rightfully so. And I wouldn't be surprised if right now that because Hezbollah is a proxy arm of Iran, because they get so much of their funding directly from Iran, that Iran right now is coming out and saying, hey, because Israel's at war with us, because they're, the U.S. and Israel are teamed up against Iran right now, that Hezbollah go start attacking Israel. I wonder if Iran's ability to support Hezbollah via cash injections and whatnot, military injections, right now is a bit stunted compared to what it used to be, because they're stretched thin with the war against the U.S. and Israel, and because internally politics hasn't been that great. They just had a bunch of protests a few months ago, and they killed a whole bunch of their protesters and yada yada. That like Hezbollah is a bit weaker than they normally would be, and that Israel's taking advantage of that and trying to go after them. While they can, while their enemy is a bit weaker, which to me makes sense as well. Might be a little column A, a little column B. President Donald Trump said negotiations continue to extend the Iran ceasefire, even as the U.S. launched strikes against military sites on an Iranian island. How can you call that a ceasefire if both sides are striking each other? We've been hitting them pretty hard, Trump said when asked by reporters on Wednesday if the ceasefire remains in place. I'd say in that part of the world, a ceasefire is when you're shooting in a more moderate manner. That's a really funny statement, but that's literally not what a ceasefire is, right? This reminds me of when he was coming out recently, right? And some of the people in his cabinet were saying things like, when Trump says 400% or 4,000%, he really means this, literally using the percentages wrong. And they were aware of that and trying to like justify it ad hoc. Oh, I forgot to turn on the light back on whenever I went to go take a break in the middle of the recording. So now it's back on. The fighting in Lebanon has exposed a rift between Israel and the U.S., which is pushing its ally for restraint. In a measure of the friction, Trump acknowledged that he'd called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu crazy during a phone call earlier this week. Nonetheless, both men say their rapport is solid. I have a feeling that Benjamin Netanyahu's time as president or prime minister or whatever of Israel is probably numbered. His days have got to be numbered at this point. I know he's been the president or leader of Israel for quite a long time, and that he's mostly ran on security, but that he hasn't been so good as far as the economy goes and other aspects. And clearly he's been leading the Israel into losing the PR war. The average American opinion of Israel, I'm sure, has absolutely cratered compared to what it used to be 10, 15, 20 years ago or whatever. So I would not be surprised if whenever the next Israeli elections are, I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head, that he could potentially be superseded by somebody else. The throne could be taken. Iran maintains its hold on the Strait of Hormuz, a critical waterway for the world's oil and natural gas and related products like fertilizer, and the U.S. continues its blockade of Iranian ports. Global fuel prices remain high, and the effects of the conflict are felt well beyond the region. Yeah, I just covered a story a couple days ago where a bunch of the major economic institutions like the International Monetary Fund, the International Trade Organization, and the Global Bank Initiative or whatever are coming together and saying like, hey guys, if you don't fix this situation, the global oil crisis is going to reach a real serious bottleneck in 4, 6, 8 months or whatever. And that we could have a serious economic crisis worldwide because of it. I've said this multiple times, but like in the US, we produce and refine and consume most of our oil domestically. But that doesn't mean that we are like shielded from the effects of a global oil shortage. Because oil is such an inelastic good and because it is an internationally traded good, that a shortage worldwide is going to have a reverberating effects regarding prices across the entire world economy, right? Not only will it increase inflation because it will increase the shipping costs of basically everything, because basically everything in the whole world, is shipped via 18-wheeler truck in some regard to somewhere, that it increases operating costs, and it increases the cost of businesses to do business, which means they're going to increase their price to make up that difference, which means prices go up, which is the definition of inflation. So while certain countries and certain economies and certain markets will experience the impacts of this more acutely than others, that does not mean that they are shielded from this. In Washington, House Speaker Mike Johnson said Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio huddled for 3 hours at the White House Monday as Trump worked on that final piece of getting commerce flowing. I'd like to imagine they're literally huddled together like in football or whatever for 3 hours straight. Mike Johnson and Rubio are like, hey guys, can we stop this huddle? We've been doing this for 2 hours. And Trump is like literally like falling asleep leaning on them. And J.D. Vance is like, no, we do what the president wants, Funny mental image. An Indian national is killed at Kuwait's main airport. A spokesperson for Kuwait's defense ministry, Brigadier General Saud Abdulaziz Al-Abtibi, said a number of hostile drones targeted a passenger building at Kuwait International Airport. It had opened only Monday after a months-long closure because of the war, which began February 28th with U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran. Oh, I didn't realize that the airport had only just opened. So it's certain they would not have struck that airport had it not been opened. So they were purposefully trying to kill people. They were purposefully trying to do some damage. And purposefully trying to act in a terroristic sort of way, right? They were trying to scare the populace that you could be in a building somewhere in Kuwait that could get struck or whatever. Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard said it didn't fire at the airport, instead claiming without providing any evidence that the terminal was damaged by a U.S.-made interceptor that failed to hit Iranian missiles. Well, regardless if it was a U.S. interceptor missile that hit it or it was one of their missiles or drones explicitly, you still blame it on Iran because they're not denying that they shot missiles or whatever at, I'm assuming, some sort of U.S. airbase or Kuwaiti airbase or even a residential area or airport or something, right? They're just arguing that it could have been a U.S. interceptor. But the U.S. wouldn't have been shooting those interceptors if it wasn't trying to knock down one of the missiles you shot. So it seems like a weird point to make, right? Because even if they're right, it doesn't make them right. U.S. Central Command called the claim false and said on Twitter that Iranian drones made a deliberate, calculated, and unjustified attack on the airport. Surveillance footage later released by Kuwait's Directorate General of Civil Aviation showed the moment of impact from several angles. In the footage, what appears to be a triangle-shaped delta-wing drone slams directly into the terminal. Iran long has used such drones in combat, particularly its Shahad drones, which are also used by Russia in its war on Ukraine. Yeah, if you have clear footage that it was a drone, and the footage I saw very much looked like a drone, right? You can see it flying in level and then dive bombing, as soon as it gets to its target. It's not like an interceptor where it would be a more parabolic arc. That's a very easily debunked claim, and right. And like I said, even if the claim wasn't debunked, and we give them the benefit of the doubt that it was a U.S. interceptor trying to shoot down one of their missiles, right? They're still trying to shoot missiles at the U.S. or the Kuwait or what Kuwaiti armed forces or whatever, or an airport at the time of a ceasefire. Another photograph from the scene showed a Kuwaiti soldier carrying what appeared to be a small aircraft engine consistent with those used by Iranian drones. India's embassy in Kuwait said the person killed was an Indian national. Authorities said 63 were wounded, including passengers and workers, and some suffered serious injuries. Kuwait's defense ministry said it destroyed over a dozen missiles and a similar number of drones from Iran. The airport partially reopened later, with Kuwait Airways flights resuming at a different terminal, according to civil aviation authorities. The foreign ministry said Kuwait will neither accept nor tolerate the attacks and was kicking out 2 Iranian diplomats. Such expulsions are an established means of communicating international ire. The U.S. military said 2 Iranian missiles fell apart en route to Kuwait and that it downed multiple drones targeting American forces in the country. The military also said U.S. and Bahraini forces intercepted missiles aimed at the Gulf Kingdom, home to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. Bahrain's defense ministry said its military intercepted and destroyed 3 missiles and a number of drones fired by Iran. The Revolutionary Guard acknowledged that it targeted the headquarters of the 5th Fleet and U.S. military facilities in another country. Yeah, so they aren't even denying the fact that, like they aren't even going to try and pretend like it was a U.S. interceptor shot in like a practice exercise or something, right? They're literally just saying, yeah, we broke the ceasefire, whatever. Man, the universe is pulling out all the stops to fuck with my recording today, right? They had a kid with a recorder out front, literally on the street right outside my apartment. Then a trash truck. Then some lady leaves her freaking car alarm on for like a whole 2 minutes, 3 minutes straight. The U.S. military said it launched strikes on an Iranian military ground control station on Qasem Island in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's foreign ministry said a telecommunications tower was struck. It called this attack and others acts of aggression that it said violated the ceasefire. Yeah, they're literally probably, I don't know the exact conditions of the ceasefire, but a ceasefire typically means both sides have agreed to cease firing at one another. So regardless if they were justified in their if they really thought that Iran was going to start doing some bad stuff using that specific ground control station in Qasem Island, that it literally is an act of an aggression to go after them, right? One side can't strike the other and pretend it's not aggression, while the other side strikes the other and pretend and they can argue it is aggression, right? Obviously, both sides are going to be biased towards themselves and aren't going to try and do so and spin it that way, but a ceasefire means both sides have agreed to cease firing. The war is increasingly tied to Israel's fight in Lebanon. And this is, to me, what shows Iran has no good faith interest in ending this with a ceasefire, that they are offering unrealistic, complete non-starter conditions for the ceasefire, like Israel stopping their war on Hezbollah. That's just not going to happen. Israeli forces have moved deeper into Lebanon than at any time in over a quarter century, while Hezbollah has launched rocket and drone attacks. The declared ceasefire in Lebanon is officially in place, and no side has formally withdrawn or declared it over even as attacks continue. Iran insists that any larger potential truce must quell the fighting in Lebanon. Netanyahu wants to keep the issue separate and is under domestic pressure to strike Hezbollah as he prepares for elections this fall. Yeah, he always runs on security, right? That's Netanyahu's main running thing. Every time he tries to get reelected, as far as I understand, he runs on security, which is sort of both real and legitimate. Israel is surrounded by a whole bunch of countries and groups and that want to see them wiped off the face of the map. There is also a racial element to this, right? There is also a lot of people in Israel that are biased against Arabs, that think, from a very religious perspective, that Israel is the home of the Jews, that God gave them and ordained them that land, and that they can kind of do what they want and kick everybody out. And it breeds a sort of racist ideology. And so there definitely is an element of that in the whole running on security, right? You want to show that you're strong against the Arabs. You want to go attack them. And that can help your electoral chances. In a podcast interview released Wednesday, Trump confirmed a report that he had called Netanyahu crazy. Monday, Trump told the New York posts Pod Force One that he was a little perturbed that Israel's fight with Hezbollah was holding back talks with Iran. Netanyahu responded on CNBC that he and Trump sometimes have tactical disagreements, but have common goals and agree on the main things. We always find a way to work out our differences, the prime minister said. Well, the prime minister, Netanyahu, has also said that he finds Trump to be easily, and the U.S. in general, to be easily manipulatable, and that he sort of plays us. So yeah, the new batch of drones and missiles and whatnot fired at one another between Iran and U.S. allies, alongside the unrealistic, complete non-starter ceasefire requirements that Iran is putting on the table, like Israel pulling out of Lebanon and stopping their fight with Hezbollah, signals to me that Iran really has no true interest in causing a ceasefire here, right? And like you could probably argue that the U.S. and Israel don't have any interest in a good faith, even termed ceasefire, because otherwise they wouldn't have initiated this whole war in the first place. But Iran is offering very unrealistic conditions, and to me that signals, alongside these new batches of strikes and the faltering and crumbling of this ceasefire, that this war is not going to end anytime soon, and that its effect on the worldwide oil supply and the economy and whatnot is only going to continue to get worse.